Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at football and FIFA after the resignation of Sepp Blatter. We're talking about it with Sunny Kapoor, Managing Director of think tank and consultancy Redefine. Welcome back, sir. Welcome back as well to Brian Schneider, International Editor at News Tank Football.
Thank you.
Craig Kapitas, Correspondent at Large for Quartz and The Atlantic. You're also the author of Metal Men.
Which, yes, I am. Which
looks at what goes on in Switzerland.
Which delves into a lot of the details of this, soon to be a major television series, by the way. Yeah, you would just add that plug.
That's a scoop. There you go. And Vladimir Andreev, President of the International Association of Sports Economists. Before the break, Craig Kapitas was saying how Blatter's effectively built a winning machine. So whoever you put in needs that block of votes no matter what. Sunny Kapoor, can you reform FIFA?
A question to you. Is the IOC better now after Salt Lake City?
Marginally, but it was a different dynamic. And this is another key historical lesson. The IOC was at the time run by a bunch of elegant old world rogues. Dashing people, colorful characters.
But crooks.
But crooks. FIFA was run by a hobgoblin dealing with who had executives who were who were as greedy as they were stupid, such as Jack Warner, one of the people indicted, trying to defend himself with a story from the American satirical magazine The Onion. This man actually thought this was a real story. The IOC never would have done that. No IOC member would ever have done something that ludicrous.
All right, let me bring in on this Vladimir Andreev, because you used to be on the ethics panel of the French Olympic Committee.
One of the major differences from my point of view between the IOC and the FIFA is that the IOC has attempted in the past years to introduce some kind of auditing process.
Correct.
Internal auditing, so which is just one step forward, because when you want to make a good auditing process, you must have external auditors, which is not the case so far with the IOC. But nevertheless, they moved on. While at the FIFA, everything is managed through what I would call internal reports. And then we have to remind the story which dates back to the early 2000s, when the General Secretary, at the moment, who was Michel Zen Ruffinen, a Swiss guy, he was the General Secretary and he was against corruption within the FIFA system. And he wrote a report about embezzlements, hidden money transfers, and so on. And this case went even to the court, but nothing happened at the end of the day.
And why is that? See, this is the question, Francois. Why is it that no European newspaper, why is it that no European government, why is it that no one put this on page one or investigated it? And and I think the reason is for that because all of them were in on it. I could tell stories I won't eat up all the time, but these people in the press here and in the government were in on this game.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about culture change here. We have to sweep out an entire generation of not just the executives, but the cartel of, let's call it 300 people that have been running this game forever. The best idea I've heard to do this is the guy is a British gentleman, and I know his last name is Eaton. I think his first name is Chris Eaton. He thinks what has to happen now is a type of truth commission or a type of amnesty commission. We're saying, all right, first you have to get a new president, but everyone, all you guys that have been operating anywhere in the world, now's your time we'll put you in front of a panel and tell us what you did, and they can kind of come clean. And then after that point, anyone gets caught in corruption, come down hard on
Truth
them.
and reconciliation.
Yeah.
All right,
they'll probably all
Truth
be
and
indicted.
reconciliation, which of course reminds us of South Africa. Now, let's talk a little bit about today's news. $10 million, remember, paid to then FIFA Vice President Jack Warner, came out of South Africa. After it obtained the bid, it paid the money for an African diaspora program, a donation to support the building of a soccer center for people of African descent in the Caribbean. This Wednesday, They held a press conference, the South Africans, and stated bluntly, yes, we paid. No, it's not a bribe.
This is not a bribe, but an above-board payment duly allocated for an approved program. We'll therefore await the United States authorities to share with us the basis on which they allege that this allocation was a bribe. We also can't understand why the said bribe was paid years after the voting and securing of rights was concluded.
Does he have a point, Brian?
There's more to the story here. Even just that press conference. The press conference was called by the South African Football Federation, who is alleged to have made the bribe or asked for it. They were supposed to be in that press conference. Suddenly, at the last second, the federation went out and we got the sports minister who wasn't really involved in this transaction. So he can deny it because he wasn't involved. It's a bit of a PR trick. So I suspect lawyers at the federation said, you know what, maybe not a good time for you to go on TV right now and challenge the FBI because they're on a bit of a roll with this investigation. I mean, they've got Jerome Valk not traveling to Canada for the Women's World Cup, which starts on Saturday, because Canada has a very strong extradition agreement with the United States.
Well, you put your finger on the other issue here, which we saw and was told to us by IOC officials and by FIFA officials when we covered this at the Journal years ago. I doubt in our lifetime any of us are going to see an Olympic Games or a World Cup in the United States. They never wanted to go there after the debacle of Atlanta and what happened in Salt Lake City. And the reason for that was, and this came from the mouths of these people, was that these organizations prefer doing business, holding these games in countries that are either totalitarian or run by, the local tin pot despot, because they have more control. The moment you do anything in the United States, you have to deal with U.S. law and U.S. jurisdiction, and they don't want to do it. And by they, I mean IOC members, no matter how clean they are right now, or FIFA. It's never going to happen.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I would go further. Look at those countries which have been voted as host countries in the past decade. South Africa. Okay, so then Brazil, then Russia, then Qatar. Big democracies, as everyone knows,
And look where the Winter Olympics are going.
I also another economic story about that. With the FIFA, just like with the IOC, there is one issue which I would call the winner's curse issue, which is as follows. You see, the IOC or the FIFA looks for a city or a country to locate the games or the cup, and they need to have competing cities or countries together, and they fuel this competition between cities, and then the cities or the countries have to overbid one another, and then at the end of the day, the winner is always cursed with cost overruns, with big costs, much more bigger than what the revenues could be. So this is a story in which unavoidably you have lobbying, you have bribery, you have everything which is not quite clear in the background of this story. And why in the US was it so nice? For instance, with Los Angeles in 1984, with the games in Los Angeles, because this year Los Angeles was the unique candidate. And why was it so? Due to the Montreal financial distress with the games.
And Montreal didn't pay off their debt till, if I'm correct, about five years ago.
And the games were awarded to Los Angeles in 1977.
In default.
No one would be a candidate.
Can we briefly talk about just the cosmic irony that it's U.S. anti-terrorism laws that increase the U.S. ability to go after financial documents that go through their country that brought down FIFA? I mean, all of the international outcry by that, I just find that a huge irony that underpins this entire story.
And we've seen recently French bank BNP hit with a massive fine because of deals it did with Sudan and with Iran, but because the money went through
U.S. banks.
The world plays by U.S. rules.
Well, it still does. We don't know for how much longer. And in some cases, it does do good. That has to be said. And this is one of the best examples where the US has taken on an issue that Europeans knew about, but nobody has bothered taking on for a very long time. But there's some interesting kind of analogies that come out. So one is, the winner's curse you mentioned. I mean, that applies not just to football and Olympic bids. It applies to mergers and acquisitions. It applies to auctioning, mobile phone spectrums, etc. The winner almost always ends up overpaying. And that's something that's not unique to sport. On the other issues, on the U.S. extrajudicial, use of its authority and pushing its muscle around, the U.S. still essentially runs the financial system. Most financial flows eventually, at some point or the other, touch U.S. jurisdiction or are transacted in U.S. dollars, which is how the U.S. got to FIFA in this case. And in the past, the U.S. has done things like when the Cayman Islands refused to share information, the U.S. said we are going to forbid any Cayman Islands banks to do business with any banks in the United States, which would have essentially destroyed Cayman Islands as a financial center. So the US is able to throw its weight around. And in cases we have seen, many European banks have said it's unfair, but it's been for money laundering, HSBC in Mexico. It's been for the LIBOR scandal. It's been for other scandals associated with corruption and bribe paying. And for the most part, in the absence of other countries taking on their fair share of responsibility, this is one of the rare instances of U.S. extraterritorial jurisdiction and throwing its weight around, ending up with a cleaner, less opaque, perhaps better financial system.
But Sonny, there is a growing chorus of people around the world, mostly from developing countries, Africa, Asia, and the Russias, against America weaponizing their extraterritorial enforcement.
And on that point,
how long that's going to last.
Let's listen to the reaction from Moscow last week when the scandal broke. Moscow, which again hosts the next World Cup in 2018, well, they took a dim view to the charge sheet laid out.
We can assume that some of them may have violated something. I don't know. But it is clear that the USA has nothing to do with this anyway. Those officials are not US citizens. And if some event indeed happened, then it did not happen on United States territory. And the United States has nothing to do with that. This is yet another blatant attempt on its part to extend its jurisdiction to other states.
Does he have a point?
The U.S. remains a global policeman in the absence of there being someone else. And sometimes that works well. In other cases, where they go unwelcome and declare wars on countries, it doesn't.
This is a major coup, is it not, for U.S. soft power? People,
yeah, definitely.
It's not soft power. Yeah. No. This is not soft power. This is full tilt boogie weaponization.
I would slightly speak for the devil's sake, because look, when Russia was voted as a host country, it was voted against the UK. Against England, I would say. And Qatar was voted against the US, which means that you can fuel a little bit of the Putin's argument, saying it's a revenge. It's not exactly what he was saying, but...
that assumes a level of coordination within governments that mostly doesn't exist. Not definitely in the United States.
But it's a charge we've heard the last 24 hours.
There's some truth to that charge. The irony for me here is that the UK or England and the United States actually thought that they were going to be awarded this in the first place and dropped a bundle wasting money on this pipe dream.
Yeah. And right now, just for those two World Cups, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, because this, again, goes back to the Swiss Attorney General. They can fuel all of this anti-Americanism and anti-British for 2018. But now this second investigation, the American investigation, was after the money and the corruption and the 10% they're taking off the top of all of the development projects, as they like to call them. The Swiss Attorney General, they have the investigation into the World Cups, and that's going to be tricky, because it may already be too late to take the World Cup away from Russia. We're 3 years away from that. They may not be logistically
possible. They can't take it away. If they take away the World Cup from Russia and Qatar, you're going to have a World Cup of lawsuits. Lawsuits
Qatar
galore.
will literally
it's like almost
sue the
a
world.
World War I Sarajevo moment.
Yeah.
Here's the problem, though. All right, so let's say they try to take away the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. They were the same vote. So legally, what do the Swiss do if they say, wait a minute, we want to take away the Qatar World Cup, but it was during the same vote as the Russia World Cup? How can you separate those two?
You have a cunning plan to clean up FIFA right there, because you see what happens. One of the things that would happen if they pulled Qatar, Qatar would sue FIFA, and they would probably win, and they would wipe out their treasury, and you would start from scratch.
Well, which wouldn't be a bad thing. And going back to your earlier point about, so I said it is possible to have had the positive globalization of football and the democratization without the negative consequences. You disagreed, partly because that was not the path that was followed. But I think going forward, there is nothing that stops us from requiring FIFA to have a corporate structure that is different, to be far more transparent, to have mandatory external audits, perhaps even multiple ones.
But who demands it? Is it the Americans?
No, the Swiss.
Nobody demands it. That's
Well, there you go.
Collective action.
It's the Swiss.
For 40 years.
This is more, the future of FIFA is
Who
more
makes
in
that
Swiss
demand?
hands.
Right. Okay. So there's two ways of doing it. So if you consider that FIFA is a Swiss legal entity, it has to be Switzerland. On the other hand, that's not what FIFA is. Or that's not what FIFA is, because FIFA is actually representative of all of global football. So in one sense, everybody's got a legitimate stake. And if UEFA, if the Europeans, if the others were to say, we are not going to be part of a FIFA that is not completely reformed, then there can be easily a parallel association that's set up, and we start afresh. And the critical mass will flow to where the money is, and the money is with the Latin Americans and the Europeans.
Well, Francois, you were just in Nigeria. A fantastic series of reports, by the way, down there. Congratulations, they were wonderful. You know Africa. If our viewers don't know it, you know Africa better than most, and you know Nigeria certainly better than anyone at this table. Now, tell me something. Are the Nigerians going to go along with an Americanized, cleaned-up type FIFA run by Anglo-Saxons out of New York and London? Are they going to go along with that?
Well, I
dynamic?
think the answer might be, and I'll turn to Brian Schneider on this, the answer might be possibly. When we see sometimes there's so much infighting in a lot of federations, they hire foreigners to be the head coach.
You're more optimistic than most. In terms of are we talking about who's going to be the next head of FIFA?
No, in terms of agreeing to this audit system.
Maybe. I don't know. You really have to look country by country, federation by federation. There are a few brave souls that from countries in the Caribbean even that have talked about, okay, now it's finally time to clean this up. But there needs to be way more voices of this. There hasn't been enough of that yet.
Vladimir Andreev, I'm fascinated to know when you sit down at the International Association of Sports Economists and have your conventions.
Well, I'm not talking about corruption anyway.
But do you come up with these plans with these plans to have checks and balances?
Yes.
The kinds that Sonny was explaining
but,
do exist in corporate boardrooms.
But
why shouldn't they exist for FIFA?
Yeah, we have not to be wrong about the starting point. The FIFA is a transnational corporation, as many corporation based in Switzerland. So the issue is not this one. The issue is its juridical status. It is not a corporation. The basic point is that it is not. It's a Swiss law association, which means that it's managed in a different way as a corporation, even though they have 6 billion revenues per every fourth year, So this is the big issue. If we want to make a reform of the FIFA, it must be transformed into a true company or stockholding company.
But what does that do? What does that do, for instance? One of the spillovers here is the use of migrant workers in building the stadiums in Qatar, where some 1,400 people have died. Hey, there's no news there. No. Back at the '98 World Cup, we caught FIFA and Adidas making all their official World Cup stuff and their balls inside Chinese prison camps. Mm-hmm. Chinese prison camps. Stoop laborers making this stuff. No one cared.
Yeah.
No one cared. They still tuned in. How do you change that mentality? That's what I don't
To
get.
be
but it
fair,
was not
that's a broader problem. I mean, everybody who buys cheap T-shirts and shoes from Nike and
But this is the beautiful game, isn't it?
true.
But we've seen this example with Brazil last year. All of the protests leading up to that. Wow, is this the first time that the people are actually going to protest the World Cup as it happens? What happened as soon as the game started?
Right.
The protests were done. Everyone was watching the games.
Football is the opium of the masses.
That's right. It's the Samaranch model. This is
Until
as I
the
was saying
Germans
before.
beat you in the semifinals.
This is what Samaranch figured out in the early 1950s. That model actually worked.
All right. With that, I want to thank once again our panel, Brian Schneider, Vladimir Andreev, Craig Kapitas, Sonny Kapoor. Stay with us, though. There's much more to say about this in Media Watch. James Creedon's along right now. Mr. Creedon, how are you?
Very well, Francois. Lots online about this.
And as we said at the outset, he's resigned, but he's not gone yet, huh?
Well, according to the photos, he's gone. This particular photo here, I'm not sure if we can see it yet, but it is the photo that a lot of the world's press...
This is the French Sports Daily.
That's right. It was when he was leaving the press conference, that impromptu press conference yesterday.
Actually, back to the wall, I suppose, how you translate that?
Something like that, or backed into a corner or something like that. And then the sort of the door to what looks like it could be heaven, but I think probably not.
in the background.
Probably not.
Fire and brimstone.
Indeed. And the Guardian went with that same photo, and they've interpreted it as a downfall, I suppose, which is probably more accurate than heaven. What else do we have in terms of front pages? There's also... not sure if that's one coming up. The domino effect, that is in one of the South American papers. And there's also this one, The End of an Empire. And indeed, that goes well with the previous one, because it's not just Sepp Blatter, it's the whole lot of them out the door. That's door, indeed. And they're decapitated with a few flies
oh dear.
going around the decapitated corpse of the FIFA boss. So all of it's some of it is pretty grim. And indeed, I suppose this is another question being asked in the Daily Telegraph's headline this morning, and it is one of the most prominent questions: what's going to happen with the Russia and Qatar World Cups?
And since that newspaper came out, it's not just the Swiss now, it's also the FBI that are looking into those bids by Russia and Qatar.
That's right. So
as well.
It's one of the questions, and indeed Marina Hyde, writing for The Guardian, had an interesting piece where she compared the attribution of Qatar to, not sure if we can see it there, to the World Cup, to Qatar rather, as she said it was like, they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires, but history may judge Qatar to have been Sepp Blatter's fatal act of expansion, almost an invitation to the US authorities to sort of investigate, because of course the US was one of the other candidates. Maybe that's a slightly cynical view. She also mentions And
just on that point, Brian Schneider, UEFA's man, Michel Platini, he's getting a bit of an easy ride in the French media. He supported the Qatar bid.
Exactly. Everyone is playing him as the next favorite for the role, and he's not sure he wants the job. He's going to make a personal decision, but there are a lot of questions regarding Michel Platini in Qatar.
Well, actually, on that point, there's an article in the Nouvel Observateur where the head of Transparency International actually is cited. If I can pull up this article, the computer's being quite slow. Sylvia Schenk is her name. Now, she's the head of sports in Transparency International, an NGO, and she considers Michel Platini to be a weak boss of UEFA, and that FIFA needs a strong man, she says, to take over in the current conditions. Points out also that his son, now this is all sous-entendu, or what would you say, suggestions. Michel Platini's son is at the head of a sports equipment company, Burda Sport, which belongs to a Qatari investment fund. And of course, it's well known that Michel Platini was a strong supporter of the Qatar's bid for the 2022 World Cup. So saying that, but saying no more, some people saying that perhaps given the current context, he mightn't be the best candidate for for FIFA. Another article, Francois, that has been getting a lot of attention is in the Washington Post. Quite a focus on Andrew Jennings, a Scottish investigative journalist who was behind a BBC Panorama show in 2006, and also a book that came out in the same year. That's right, FIFA Foul, the secret world of FIFA bribes, vote rigging, and ticket scandals. He really was one of the figures who uncovered a lot of this corruption, and he's a very happy man, according to this interview in the Washington Post.
But he was banned from FIFA for years.
And apparently he was even punched in the face and spat on by one of the FIFA executives, the guy who cited the Onion article.
Jack did punch AJ.
There's clearly some bad feeling there, and he is quite happy now. He said he can.
A big man.
He can retire. Well, yes, throws quite a punch, I'd imagine. But he said, "I just hope I can afford the airfare to New York, and that someone will let me sleep on their couch." He's talking about the trial that may await.
Last vintage agents. It's going to be in Zurich.
So
it'll be in Zurich.
He wants to be in the press box to say, "Hi guys, it's been a long run, hasn't it?" So it's slightly gleeful, a certain element of Schadenfreude, I think.
All right.
Coming across in that interview.
A bit of gloating on the part of Andrew Jennings. We're going to leave it there.
Thanks, Francois.
I want to thank you, James Creed, and I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.